"Don't eat that food." The shout shattered the calm of the exclusive cafe. Every head turned to the homeless boy who dared to speak. He had just seen the billionaire's wife slip something into the soup, but he had no idea that those 3 words would expose a betrayal worth millions. There's a kind of place that doesn't just exist in the city. It sits on top of it, like a beautiful painting hanging on a dusty wall. That was the Garden Café, tucked away in the heart of Cresthaven. It was a sanctuary of polished stone and whispering leaves, a world apart from the grumbling traffic and hurried footsteps just beyond its iron fence. The air here didn't smell of exhaust fumes. It smelled of rich, dark coffee, of warm, buttery croissants, and of the sweet, delicate perfume from the flower beds that bordered the patio. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, where the sunlight dappled to the canopy of manicured trees, and where the only urgent sound was the gentle clink of porcelain and the low hum of quiet, important conversations. At midday, the cafe was in its full, graceful swing. Waiters moved like dancers in their crisp white shirts, balancing trays laden with food that looked almost too beautiful to eat. The patrons, the city's elite, sat at little wrought iron tables, their faces smooth with the ease that comes from a life where problems are solved with a phone call. They were all part of the painting, every one of them. And right in the center of it all, like the most important brushstroke, sat Elias Vance. If you lived in Cresthaven, you knew the name. Elias Vance was a man who had built an empire from a dream and a relentless will. He'd started with nothing but a head full of ideas and turned them into a fortune in real estate and ventures so vast most people couldn't even picture them. At 68, he carried that history in his posture. Straight back, confident, a man who owned the room without even trying. His suit was a testament to his success, sharp and expensive, and his gold-rimmed glasses caught the light, reflecting a life of limitless opulence. But if you looked closer, past the shine of the glasses, you might have seen a tiredness in his eyes, a heaviness. As he glanced at the menu, his movements were slow, thoughtful, almost hesitant. The energy that had built his empire seemed to have settled into a weary weight. Across from him sat his wife, Isabella. She was like a jewel, placed perfectly in the setting of the cafe to catch the light. 25 years his junior, she seemed to have stepped directly from the pages of a fashion magazine. Her hair was a cascade of jet black, framing a face that was impossibly perfect, from her high cheekbones to the bright red of her lipstick. She was elegance personified, every gesture smooth and deliberate. But her smile was a beautiful, empty thing. It didn't reach her eyes, which were constantly drifting away, down to the screen of the phone she held in her lap. As she listened to Elias, she absently twirled a diamond bracelet around her wrist, a bracelet that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was present, but she wasn't there. Just beyond the polished stone of the patio, on the other side of the low fence, another world existed, the world of the painting's frame. And here, a boy named Leo watched. He was small for 14, swallowed by a faded gray hoodie that was too big for his thin frame. His sneakers were scuffed, the laces frayed. His dark, intelligent eyes didn't see the beauty of the cafe. They scanned it like a map of opportunity. They darted from table to table, calculating. A half-eaten sandwich left by a hurried businessman. A purse slung carelessly over the back of a chair. He was a ghost on the edges of this bright world, a familiar shadow to the street, but invisible to the people inside the fence. His stomach clenched with a familiar, hollow ache. The smells from the cafe were a special kind of torture, warm, savory, and completely out of reach. He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the pavement, leaning against the cool iron of the railing. His gaze settled on Elias Vance's table. It was a feast. A pristine white bowl of soup steamed invitingly, next to a basket of crusty bread, and a glass of sparkling water that fizzed gently in the sunlight. Leo's mouth watered. He was just about to look away, to continue his search for a less complicated chance at a meal, when something made him pause. Elias adjusted his glasses and picked up his own phone, his attention shifting for just a moment. And in that moment, Isabella moved. Her hand slipped into her designer handbag, a motion so smooth it was almost invisible. Her fingers closed around a small, clear vial. Without a hint of hesitation, with a casual flick of her wrist, she twisted it open. She leaned forward slightly, as if to share an intimate thought with her husband, and tilted her hand over the steaming bowl. A few drops of clear liquid fell, vanishing into the soup instantly, like they had never been there. Leo froze. His breath caught in his throat. Had he really seen that? It happened so fast, so calmly. He blinked, wondering if hunger was making him see things. But then, she picked up the spoon and stirred the soup gently, her expression never changing. The perfect mask didn't slip for a second. Then she leaned closer to Elias, her voice a low, venomous whisper that, in a sudden lull in the cafe's chatter, carried just far enough. "After all the trouble I've gone through," she murmured, her words ice cold, "you won't ruin this now." The air left Leo's lungs. The words, so full of hidden meaning, confirmed it. This wasn't his imagination. This was real, in this place of perfect peace, surrounded by all this beauty and wealth. Something monstrous was happening. He stared, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. The woman was beautiful, polished, sitting next to a man who represented power and security. And yet, Leo had just seen her commit an act of pure poison. He looked at Elias, an old man who just seemed tired, unaware. The spoon was right there, next to the bowl. A silent battle erupted inside Leo. "Walk away," one voice screamed. "This is not your fight." "Who are you?" "A nobody. A street kid. If you say anything, they'll blame you. They'll never believe you. Just walk away." But another voice, quieter but stronger, spoke up. It was the voice that remembered his mother, before she was gone, telling him to always do the right thing, no matter how hard. It was the voice that hated bullies, that couldn't stand to see someone being hurt. He watched as Elias set his phone down and reached for the spoon. His fingers closed around the handle. He started to lift it, to dip it into the golden broth. The perfect picture was about to be shattered, and Leo, the boy from the shadows, was the only one who could see the crack. His hands were trembling. His legs felt like water. But as the spoon dipped toward the soup, he knew he couldn't just stand there. He couldn't be a ghost anymore. He took a shaky step forward. Then another. He pushed open the little gate to the patio, and he marched right toward the center of the perfect painting, his heart pounding like a drum, ready to shout into the silence. For a heartbeat, Leo was trapped in a bubble of his own fear. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of the cafe fading into a dull roar in his ears. Each step he took across the smooth stone patio felt like wading through thick mud. His scuffed sneakers, so out of place on the pristine surface, seemed to scream his intrusion with every scuff. The smells of good food and expensive perfume, once a distant torment, now felt suffocating. His mind raced, a frantic, terrified chorus. "Turn back. They'll laugh at you. They'll call the police. She'll point her perfect, manicured finger at you, and they'll believe her. They always believe the people in the nice clothes." He saw the spoon in the old man's hand, Elias's hand. It was a heavy, elegant piece of silverware, catching the sun. It hovered over the bowl, the steam from the soup curling around it like a ghost. Leo's eyes darted to Isabella. She was watching her husband, a faint, unnatural smile on her red lips, but her eyes were sharp, focused. She was waiting. She was anticipating. And in that moment, the voice of doubt was drowned out by a single clear image. His mother's face, not as she was at the end, tired and sick, but as she was when he was small, kneeling in front of him, wiping dirt from his cheek. "You always speak up when you see something wrong, Leo. Always. It doesn't matter who you are. What matters is what's right." The spoon began its descent. The bubble burst. Leo's legs, which had felt like lead, suddenly propelled him forward. He didn't run. It was more of a desperate, determined stride. He reached the table just as the spoon touched the surface of the soup. His voice, when it came out, was not the powerful shout he'd imagined. It was a dry, cracked thing, strained with fear and urgency, but it cut through the civilized murmur of the cafe like a shard of glass. "Don't eat that." The effect was instantaneous. It was as if someone had pressed a universal pause button. A fork clattered onto a plate, the sound shockingly loud in the sudden silence. A woman mid-laugh choked on her chuckle. Every head, from every table, swiveled toward the source of disruption. The waiters froze, their trays held aloft. Elias Vance jerked his hand back, as if the spoon had burned him, the soup splashing back into the bowl. His wide, startled eyes, magnified behind his gold-rimmed glasses, locked onto Leo. There was no anger yet, only pure, unadulterated shock. But the shock on Elias's face was nothing compared to the transformation on Isabella's. Her polished composure shattered. She whipped her head around, and for a split second, Leo saw pure, undiluted panic in her eyes. It was there and gone in a flash, replaced by a fury so cold it made him want to step back. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice like the crack of ice. It was a voice used to being obeyed, a voice that expected the world to bend to its will. Leo stood his ground, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was a tidal wave inside him, making his hands shake. He pointed a trembling finger at the bowl. "She put something in your food. I saw her. Don't eat it." A collective gasp rippled through the stunned patrons. Whispers started, hushed and excited. Isabella shot to her feet, her chair scraping against a stone with a jarring screech. "You little liar," she hissed, the venom in her voice so potent it seemed to poison the air around the table. "How dare you? How dare you accuse me of something so vile?" She turned her furious gaze to the surrounding tables, playing to the audience. "Who even let you in here?" "Security." The words were meant to shame him, to put him back in his place. And they stung. But Leo looked past her to Elias. The old man was still holding the spoon, his knuckles white. He was looking at his wife. Then at Leo, confusion and dawning suspicion wore on his face. "Isabella," Elias said, his voice low but firm. The single word was heavy with unasked questions. "What is he talking about?" "He's talking about nonsense." Isabella spat, her composure fraying at the edges. She waved a dismissive hand at Leo. "He's a street rat. Look at him. He's probably just trying to scam you for money. Or steal your food when you're not looking." She was trying to redefine him, to turn him from a witness into a threat. But Leo felt a strange calm settle over him. The hardest part was over. He had spoken. Now he just had to tell the truth. He stepped closer, his voice steadying, growing clearer. "I'm not lying. I saw her. She had a little bottle in her bag. She poured it into your soup when you were looking at your phone." He looked directly into Elias's eyes, pleading with him to see. "You can smell it if you don't believe me. It's not right." Elias's face paled. He slowly lowered the spoon onto the tablecloth, never breaking eye contact with Leo. The doubt was winning. He turned back to his wife, his eyes narrowing. The gentle tiredness was gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of a man who had built an empire by spotting lies. "Isabella," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "What's going on here?" The café was utterly silent, every person holding their breath. The perfect afternoon had been torn in two, and a homeless boy was standing in the tear, holding the edges. The rising tension was a physical thing, thick enough to taste. Leo had cried out into the silence. Now, he could only wait and hope that someone was listening. The silence that followed Elias's question was heavier than any noise Leo had ever heard. It was a thick, suffocating blanket, smothering the café. The gentle fountain in the corner suddenly seemed to be shouting. Isabella stood frozen, her body rigid. Leo could see the calculations flashing behind her eyes, desperate and rapid. The polished mask was still there, but it was cracking under the pressure, like fine porcelain hit by a hairline fracture. She let out a short, harsh laugh that had no joy in it. It was a sound meant to deflect, to dismiss. "This is absurd, Elias," she said, her voice straining for lightness but landing on a sharp, brittle edge. She gestured toward Leo with a flick of her wrist, as if swatting a fly. "He's just a child, a desperate one. He's spinning a story because he sees a wealthy man and thinks he can get something." She turned her gaze on Leo, and this time the hatred in it was naked and raw. "You've caused enough trouble. Leave. Now." But the spell was broken. Her words, which would have commanded obedience moments before, now fell flat. The other patrons weren't looking at Leo with disgust anymore. They were looking at Isabella with dawning suspicion. The whispers started again, but this time they were not about the scruffy boy. "She seems awfully nervous." Why would he make that up? Look at her hands, they're shaking. Elias heard the whispers. He leaned back in his chair, the weary businessman replaced entirely by the formidable patriarch. He didn't look at his wife. His eyes were fixed on Leo. Malik, Elias said, using the name he'd heard moments before. His voice was calm, but it carried across the patio. You said you saw a bottle. Can you describe it? This was his chance. Leo clung to the question like a lifeline. He nodded, his voice clear and firm. It was small, like for medicine. The liquid was clear. She twisted the cap off and poured it in, then stirred it with a spoon. I swear on my life, I saw it. You've been watching us, she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. She took a step toward Leo, her finger jabbing the air. Haven't you? You've been spying from the bushes. You little creep. You're jealous. You see what we have and you want to destroy it because you have nothing. Her words were meant to wound, and they did. They echoed the deepest fears Leo carried. But as he stood there, being screamed at by this beautiful, furious woman, something solidified inside him. He wasn't the one unraveling. She was. I'm not jealous, he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. It cut through her tirade. I saw what I saw, and I couldn't just stand there and let you hurt him. That was it, the simple, undeniable truth. It hung in the air, stark and honest against Isabella's venom. Elias finally turned his head and looked at his wife, really looked at her, and what he saw, the wild eyes, the trembling lip, the sheer panic, must have been the final confirmation. The last of his doubt evaporated, leaving behind a landscape of cold, hard betrayal. Call the police, Elias said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words were directed at the frozen waiter, but they were a verdict aimed at Isabella. No. The scream tore from Isabella's throat. Elias, you can't. This is insane. You're going to believe this animal over your own wife. But the plea fell on deaf ears. The waiter, jolted into action, hurried inside. The distant wail of sirens, which had been a faint promise, now grew louder, closer, weaving through the city's streets toward them. The sound triggered something primal in Isabella. As the two police officers entered the patio, their faces stern and official, her defiance crumbled into pure desperation. The officers approached the table, their eyes taking the scene. The wealthy, pale man, the hysterical, beautifully dressed woman, and the ragged, resolute boy. What seems to be the problem here, sir? One officer asked Elias. Before Elias could speak, Isabella lunged for the bowl. It's nothing. A misunderstanding, she cried, trying to grab it. But the officer was quicker, intercepting her hand. Ma'am, step back, he said firmly. He looked at the soup, then at Elias. This boy, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion, claims my wife attempted to poison me. I believe him. The officer's expression hardened. He looked at Isabella. Ma'am, is there something you want to tell us? It was over. Leo could see it. The fight drained out of her. The anger was replaced by a terrifying, cold resignation. She looked from Elias's stony face to the officer's impassive one. She was cornered, and she knew it. Fine, she spat, the word a bitter poison in itself. Her shoulders slumped, but her eyes blazed with final, defiant hatred. You want the truth? I'm tired. I'm tired of living in his shadow. Tired of waiting for my life to begin. He was never supposed to make it this long. The doctor said, "Nah." She trailed off, but the confession was complete. The silence that followed was absolute. The gasps this time were not of shock, but of horror. The perfect facade wasn't just cracked. It had shattered, revealing the ugly rot beneath. The officer's voice was grim. Isabella Vance, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer recited the rights and secured her hands behind her back, Isabella didn't struggle anymore. She just stared at Elias, her face a blank mass of defeat. I deserve it all, she muttered as they led her away, her voice barely a whisper now. I deserved everything. And then she was gone. The siren started again, this time fading into the distance, taking the poison and the pretense with them. Elias Vance slowly sank back into his chair. The commanding presence was gone, leaving behind a shell of a man. He stared at the empty space where his wife had been, his face a battlefield of disbelief, grief, and a profound shock of betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight. The painting was ruined. The beautiful, perfect world of the garden cafe had been exposed as a lie, and in the wreckage of it all stood Leo. He had told the truth. He had been brave. And now, as the stunned silence settled back over the patio, he felt more alone and exposed than he ever had hiding in the shadows. The unraveling was complete. What was left to do now? For a long moment, nobody moved. The garden cafe felt like a stage after the main actor had made a shocking exit. The audience, the wealthy patrons, sat in stunned silence, their expensive lunches forgotten. The air, once sweet with flowers and coffee, now felt thick with a residue of betrayal and drama. All eyes were on Elias Vance, who sat perfectly still, staring at the empty chair opposite him as if he could still see the ghost of his wife sitting there. Leo felt like an intruder. The adrenaline that had held him up, that had given his voice power, drained away, leaving him hollow and shaky. His job was done. The danger was past. Now, he was just a homeless boy standing in the middle of a scene where he didn't belong. He took a small, hesitant step backward, intending to melt back over the iron fence and into the anonymity of the streets. Leo, the name, spoken softly, stopped him. Elias had turned his head. The shock in his eyes was beginning to recede, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. But as he looked at the boy, a new emotion surfaced. Gratitude. It was a fragile light in the profound darkness of his gaze. "Don't go," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. He gestured to the chair Isabella had vacated. "Please, sit." Every instinct told Leo to run. People like him didn't sit at tables like this. But the raw sincerity in the old man's voice held him. Slowly, nervously, he moved forward and slid into the chair. The cushion was still warm. He perched on the edge, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself as small as possible. Elias studied him for a long time, not with suspicion, but with a quiet, intense curiosity. It was as if he was seeing him for the first time, not as a disruption, but as a person. "You saved my life," Elias said finally. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a universe. "I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know if it's even possible." Leo looked down at his grimy hands. I just did what anyone would do," he mumbled, the words feeling inadequate. Elias gave a soft, sad chuckle. It was the first real sound he'd made since the police left. "No, son," he said gently. "You did what almost no one would do. Most people would have looked the other way. They would have told themselves it was none of their business, that they were probably seeing things. You had every reason to keep walking, but you didn't." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table. "That's not just bravery, Leo. That's character. And that is rarer than any diamond." The kindness in his tone was overwhelming. Leo felt a hot prickling behind his eyes, and he blinked rapidly, fighting back tears he hadn't shed in years. He just shrugged, unable to find any words. "Where do you go at night?" Elias asked, his voice dropping, becoming even more gentle. The question was like a physical touch, and Leo flinched. "Around," he whispered, his voice thick. "You know, wherever it's dry." Elias nodded slowly, a deep frown line appearing between his brows. He didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Wait here for one moment," he said, and it sounded less like a command and more like a request. He stood and walked a few paces away, speaking into the phone in a low, firm voice. Leo sat, his heart thumping again, but with a new kind of anxiety. Was he calling someone to take him away? To a group home? To juvie? The familiar fear of authority crept back in. When Elias returned, his expression had softened. He sat back down and looked directly at Leo. "Help is on the way," he said. Leo's stomach clenched. "Help? A friend of mine," Elias explained. "A good man. He's going to take you to a safe place tonight. A warm bed, a hot meal. No questions asked." Leo stared at him, disbelief warring with a hope so sharp it was painful. You don't have to do that." "I know," Elias said, and for the first time, a genuine, gentle smile touched the corners of his mouth. That's why I want to. You didn't have to do what you did, either. You see, the simple logic of it broke through Leo's defenses. He looked at Elias, truly looked at him, and saw not a powerful billionaire, but a tired, grateful old man whose life had just been saved. The wall Leo had built around himself for survival began to crumble. Sometimes, Elias said, his gaze drifting toward the fountain, life gives us a chance to change someone else's story. You changed mine today, Leo, in the most profound way possible. He looked back at the boy, his eyes glistening. Maybe, if you'll let me, I can help change yours. This doesn't have to be the end of the story. It could be a new beginning. A single tear escaped and traced a clean path through the dirt on Leo's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the emotion wasn't one of fear or hunger or cold. It was relief. It was a feeling of being seen, not as a problem or a ghost, but as a person who had done something good. A sleek, dark car pulled up quietly to the curb outside the café. A kind-faced man in a simple jacket got out and stood waiting patiently. Elias nodded toward him. That's David. He'll take care of you. Leo stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He looked from the car back to Elias, 1,000 questions in his eyes. Go on, Elias said softly. We'll talk more tomorrow. I promise. As Leo walked toward the gate, he paused and looked back. The patrons were slowly returning to their conversations, the spell of the afternoon's drama finally lifting. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows. The lesson of the day was written plain for anyone who had witnessed it. Courage doesn't always wear a suit, and kindness doesn't always come from a place of power. Sometimes, the most profound strength is found in the hearts of those we overlook. Leo had walked into the café a boy from the shadows, invisible and alone. He walked out with the warmth of the sun on his face and the faint, incredible sensation of hope blooming in his chest. His bravery had saved a life, but had also, just maybe, saved his own. Leo's one brave decision changed 2 lives forever. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about the moments that reveal who we truly are.